All right, Michelle, we are live. We are live for another episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Verity Lala podcast. I am Muggin and have here today my lovely co-host
Michelle.
Michelle. How are you going?
Good, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, really well. I've been thinking a lot about an article which we're going to discuss today, which came out by Helen Andrews in Compact magazine,
Yeah.
and it was called Great Feminization. And it was really about have women sort of overly feminized the whole workplace, basically. I mean, in particular, areas like academia and publishing. And I was thinking about how this related to Australian literature. And yeah, thought we might discuss that a bit.
Yes. So what do you think has there been a feminization in the literary world? Um,
Listen, I think that you cannot say there hasn't been. Like, I actually looked up some statistics, sorry, because I always think that things like this are best to, you need to see where things are actually at rather than just sort of making it up by your own anecdotal, ideas. So, it's a bit harder looking for Australia. There were heaps of statistics that came around this for US publications, but I did look up in Australia. And so basically, they said so there was a 2022 diversity and inclusion survey. And it was by the Australian Publishers Association and the University of Melbourne. And they said that 84% of publishing employees, and that includes, the big publishing houses, literary journals, and so forth, are women, and 13% are men. So that's pretty strong, and I think that's, most people would probably say, if they thought about who they were relating to, especially in our little circle, literary journal circle, it's publishing is a women's women's game. Women make up 65% of Australian authors, 61% of frequent readers, and in the Stellar Count 2020, 55% of books reviewed in major publications were written by women, and that was the first time in Australian history. So that's kind of where women were lagging behind men in terms of parity. So women have been kind of at least at parity in terms of Australian publishing for several years, but behind that in terms of being reviewed. So now it's actually over. So more women are being reviewed than men. And, there was a lot of different things. For example, Creative Australia staff, 75% of are female. And for example, I think we know as well, I did a little survey of most literary journals and literary writers' festivals, and most of the staff, about 75 to 80%
yeah.
of staff and head, not just staff, but senior staff, the
Yeah.
people calling the shots are women. So, I can link all those things into our show notes. But yes, definitely Australian publishing is definitely female dominated, and whatever that means after that. But in terms of numbers, that's true.
Yeah, yeah, and just even just being in the industry and maneuvering through the industry, just visually, you can just, from my
Yeah,
experience, just
yeah,
there's always
yeah,
more women than men.
yeah.
There's yeah, whether it's festivals, literary events, literary journals, the editorial team is more women than men. And so I guess does that what does that mean? Does it have an effect on the literary scene?
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I guess we should maybe talk about whether we think um, biological sex has an impact on on men and women and their
Mm.
interests and the way they behave. And um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look,
that's a good point. Yeah. Well, in the article Helen Andrews wrote, she was talking a lot about biological sex, and I think she maybe went a little bit too far, but there was definitely some truth in what she said as well. And I've looked up some other sources. So yeah, the idea is like, especially around issues of conflict resolution, women tend to go for like more harmonizing modes. They don't want it like direct confrontation. They tend to be more about morality than about truth.
mm,
Okay, they tend to be more, if they are going to sort of take someone down or disagree with someone, they won't do it directly necessarily through debate. They're less likely to agree with free speech of people they disagree with, and more likely to practice social exclusion and other tactics like cancellation if they don't agree with someone, so shutting down people's voices. So for example, I saw a recent article based on FIRE, which is a free speech organization in the US, and they said that across left, right, progressive, conservative divides, men were still, both conservative men and progressive men were still way, way more likely to actually want to, or allow others, believe that you should allow others whose opinion was different to yours to be
mm,
heard, for example, on a college campus. Whereas women, whether they were leftist or conservative, they actually were less likely to say that's okay that someone comes onto my college campus and says something I don't like. So women seem to be way across the political divide more averse to hearing or allowing to hear different points of view. And I think that's mainly because they feel that it's going to upset people, and women give a lot more weight to not being offensive, and that actually leads sometimes to these more subversive ways of getting your goals, which is like reputational takedown and cancellations, rather
mm.
than just listening to the other person's point of view and then coming back directly with the point of view. There's this more sort of murky way of going around things, which is a bit more feminine. So I found that article really interesting.
Yes, it is. It is, and I would agree that that our biological sex plays a role in how what we're interested in and how we behave and how we maneuver through the world, i.e., male and female. Um, but I think that, but the article was talking. I mentioned a lot about masculinity and femininity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be look. I think men and women are more alike than than we are different in
Mm-hmm.
general. We are more alike than we are different. There are real differences in terms of that's related to our biological sex, um, which is just a fact, just a reality. But I don't, yeah, I do think the industry has been um, kind of controlled or moved in this um, call it toxic feminine way. It has moved that way, um, but it's not. And as we were saying earlier, it's not just you know male versus female. It's something much larger because yes, we are talking in general, but then at the end of the day, we are also individual men
Yeah.
and women. We are individuals, and each individual will fall somewhere on that spectrum. You know, um,
Yeah.
but the woke culture, which we aim to speak about, um, does move in that toxic femininity. It's not so much about male or female, but more so about a mindset and
Yeah.
a way of behavior that both men and women fit into. As
Yeah.
we in the literary scene, a lot of
Mm,
men
I really
operate in this.
agree. Yeah. I'm more comfortable with the idea of it being, feminization. It can apply to both men and women, as can sort of what we traditionally think of as masculine traits.
Right.
It's because there's a I mean, I was thinking about myself when I was reading this article, and in terms of like feminine traits here, I tend to always want
Mm,
harmony and this and that. But then I've also got a sort of a streak where if something really goes against my morals, I will stand my ground no matter what, right?
yeah,
And that's quite a disagreeable, what's coded as a masculine trait. So I think all of us are a little bit of a mixture of both.
that's right. That's right. I mean, for myself, naturally, although life has taught me otherwise, but naturally, I'm more agreeable. I'm more of an agreeable person naturally, and
Mm,
that's not as masculine. I'm also
mm,
not as competitive as as men are. I guess naturally are more competitive. I'm not, um, but I am. But I do seek the truth, and
mm.
I do value truth over politeness. So I guess that's. So we all fall somewhere on this spectrum.
Somewhere on the spectrum, yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly, yeah. It's really interesting. That's why I thought this would be great for our conversation, because like it's kind of dangerous territory to enter in a way, because you're always going to offend somebody. But I think it's really
yeah,
worth exploring, especially for literature, because a lot of, I think, when Helen Andrews wrote this article, she was taught, and she focused a lot on academia, which I think is very
mm,
linked to the literary scene as
it
well,
is,
right
yeah,
there.
it
There's a
is,
lot
it
of
is.
crossover there. So she was talking about, but I disagree with some of her things. So she argued that wokeness isn't the product of Marxism or postmodernism. It's the result of demographic feminization. As women have become the majority in cultural institutions, they've imported female modes of interaction, including social exclusion, consensus building, emotional moralizing, into spaces that once prized argument and risk. And like I do agree with that we've, as women have entered, especially specific workplaces like academia or publishing, which are very female heavy, just based on the raw statistics. That is
Yeah,
incontrovertible truth. Um, that we have brought female modes of interaction into those spaces, and that's really changed how, for example, disagreements or conflict resolution is handled. Um,
yeah,
but I don't agree the fact that she says basically wherever women go, wokeness goes, and that wokeness isn't the product of Marxism or postmodernism. She says it's the product of feminine interaction. I think that's taking a little bit too far.
yeah. I completely disagree, because when you look at Marxism, the foundational ideas are Marxism.
Mm,
The oppressor versus the oppressor. That is
yeah.
wokeness, and the methods with which they promote this and enact this is postmodernist.
Mm.
A use
Yeah,
of
and
this.
most of those postmodernist initial scholars were men, because that was the times. This was during for 1930s, 40s onwards. Up, once we got into the 60s and 70s and 80s, then we had different theorists like Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks, and so forth. But up until then, there was like Marcuse, there was
Mm,
Derrida, there was Foucault. These were men, right? So they were bringing this whole theory of like there's no objective truth, going
right,
against the sort of overarching narrative. It's very subjective, our truth, and that there's
right.
oppressor and oppressed. And then the post-colonial scholars like said and so forth that, so all these were men, and I'm not blaming men for this. Like, it's interesting ways of thinking, and it's great to explore that. But this was a sort of a foundation of critical theory that kind of rose up through the academy, and then has now entered the mainstream. My feeling is that women have ushered in the mode of wokeism, not necessarily the ideological foundations of it. That was already
Mhm.
kind of happening, for quite some time. But a lot of those things appeal to women's nature, like, not of course across the board. We can't say for every woman, but the
Right,
idea that
right.
like Getzard's idea of suicidal empathy. So women tend to be like, and there are great reasons for this. If you think about survival, women
Right.
have to be more empathic and more
Right.
nurturing and give people the benefit of doubt more, and all these things that they're not necessarily good or bad things. It depends on the context. Like within like, for example, a context of child rearing and so forth, these are like really necessary
Right.
things that
Yeah.
women need in their mode of going around their daily lives. You know, they have to learn to get on with a whole group, not be as competitive, be more cooperative with other women, and and have more empathy and so forth, because you're caring for children and others in your community. These are all, you know, neither good nor bad. They are adaptive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think that when they enter certain spaces, if as women we sort of make that the main cultural overriding way of going about things, we kind of become the handmaidens of wokeism in a way, because um, it ushers in everything on the back of having a much greater emphasis on empathy and compassion and all these sort of feelings, rather than that
Right.
sort of objective idea of truth and let's weigh this up, and you know,
Right.
those things can then be brushed aside. And I'm not saying that people do it on purpose or with bad
Right.
motivation, but I think that's how we've come to where we've gotten. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll use language like, you know, if someone brings up an argument that's sound, a lot of times
Mm,
they'll focus on it being either disrespectful,
mm-hmm.
inappropriate,
Yes.
always language surrounding appropriateness, politeness, tone, the way
Yes.
it's said, rather than what is actually said.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I found that very revealing. You know, when I
Mm,
was in that space, but it
mm,
but then again, because the writer also spoke about, you know, um, feminization, or not being interested in truth,
mm,
and masculinity being interested in truth. Um, but that idea really resonates, really correlates with postmodernism, because postmodernism doesn't believe in truth in general, objective truth. It destroys what it calls ground narrative. So again, it aligns. You know, the woke movement aligns with postmodernist, um, Marxist theory. You know, so yeah, and people just I think thing is most people, I don't think in their lives really question um, their relationship to their own sex. They don't really question, you know, society's kind of what society tells us about ourselves in terms of our sex or
mm,
gender. They don't really
mm,
question it. They just go along with it, and they inevitably behave stereotypically. You know,
mm,
and there's also power in behaving in the stereotypical either male or female, because the world understands that and you can maneuver. So when it comes to the woke movement and, you know, toxic femininity, there's a roadmap there already. The
mm,
roadmap there of how to behave, and the society understands it, so you can maneuver through it. You know, using
mm.
that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to go with the default, I suppose,
yeah. Yes.
in some senses. And I suppose it's interesting because one thing which I did agree with in Helen Andrews' article, was that she said that women's women's kind of dominance in, or increasing dominance in workplaces, more, you know, some more than others. And for example, what we're talking about Australian literature, definitely more than
Yeah.
for something like truck driving or something, you know. So women's
Right.
dominance in certain areas hasn't come about necessarily always um, as a result of a meritocracy or just
Mm.
naturally. It is also ridden on the back of the rise of, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion,
Yeah.
legislation, which, you know, we think of that more now in terms of the last sort of 10 to 15 years in terms of race and stuff like that. And in many cases, that's been a sort of a positive discrimination, and it's been needed as a way of rebalancing things, because there has been real racism, real sexism, and so forth in hiring. But with women's issues, it came earlier. It was more like sort of the 1960s and 70s. It's been around quite some time. And once again, that did need to be redirected, because I remember my mum saying that when she so she got a scholarship to go and study chemistry at uni, and she was only 18, you know, she really, really wanted to go, you know, and her father just said, no, you're not doing that. You know, you're a woman. That's not going to be good for you. So she just accepted that, because, you know, this was, you know, 19 whatever 60s Australia. You didn't have many options, whatever. You couldn't even get a house loan at that point as a woman without your husband signing. You know, you couldn't do a lot of things, right? And then so then she managed to get interviewed for a job, even though she wasn't able to go to uni. She got an interview for a job, and it was like in a chemistry lab. And so they just sat there and said, listen, based on your HSC results, you're the most you know, qualified person here, but you're a woman. You're just going to go off and have babies, and it's going to be a pain for us. So we're going to employ this bloke over here. Now, at that stage, they were allowed to just say that to your face, right?
Yeah.
And she just went, oh, okay. And she went off, and she did, because she had no other option. She did go off and have babies. So here I am. But that was a reality. And so those legislations that came in around that time, where women could, you know, you couldn't discriminate against a woman when you were hiring her or whatever. They were responding to a real issue, a real world issue. So in a sense, it was a good thing. But I suppose what Helen Andrews is saying is that now it has become sort of too skewed to the sense that companies are very, very sensitive about not doing the right thing in terms of employing women, or, you know, minorities in terms of race or whatever it is. So that a lot of the promotion of women and the basically employment of women has been as a result of something that isn't necessarily to do with meritocracy, because people will say, well, I have to tick the female box, so I'll put this woman into this role or whatever. And I think in some spaces that's probably true, probably spaces that are very run by those kind of concerns, like publishing, like academia. You know, there's probably some truth to that, and that this sort of feminization of those spaces hasn't necessarily been just because sort of women have been better than the men, the best person to get the job, but it's becoming a thing now where it's like, it's what you do. And I don't know, it's a contentious issue. What do you think?
It is. I mean, even like if we speak about the literary scene, I mean, even like you just know how you should behave. Like you just know, you know, you're not supposed to speak directly to, you know, other fellow writers. But if you have an issue, if you don't have an issue, you're not, you know, allowed to speak directly because it looks bad or it sounds bad. You know, a lot of the men in the industry have adopted this mindset and this way of communicating that's, you know, that's quite subversive and not direct, and, you know, very fawning. There's a lot of fawning goes on in the you know, literary scene, and this is due to the, you know, this feminization, but it's quite toxic. It's not doesn't represent every woman, but it represents a particular kind of unhealthy woman, or unhealthy mindset, unhealthy femininity. It represents that, and the you know, I mean, the woke movement is toxic, and it is negative, and it is overall harmful. And so for me, this feminization of the literary scene it's a net negative. It's a net negative for everyone, you know, in my
I think that especially if it's got men not speaking, not speaking their minds and speaking as they would, then it sort of it deprives the whole scene of the balance that I think the male and feminine characteristics which we have within ourselves and then within our workplaces and whatever, it stops that balance coming up. Do you know what I mean? Like if a man feels like if he says something directly that he's just going to be told he's a misogynist pig, then men will shut up, right? And then we're missing those insights. And I actually really like that balance. Like it was one of the first things I realized when I was started to become managing editor of Verity La back in sort of 2014, that everyone's communication styles are really different. And I hadn't sort of factored this in. So when a woman writes to you, not always a woman, but often a woman, it'll be much more like touchy-feely and lovey-dovey, and we're putting X's and O's at the end of every email. And if I was like to edit a piece of the woman, I have to go much more softly, and right? And that's fine. And then when a man would write to me, if I tried to respond with that same kind of like kid glove, he would just like blow it off. He'd be like, no, let's just get to the point, right? And then I'd go, oh, okay, it's a different communication style. So then I would adapt myself to that communication style. One was neither better than the other. It was just like a different way or prioritizing different things. Do you know what I mean? So I just had to learn to be really like adaptable in my communication style, because I realized that if I tried to talk to men in the same way, not all men, but a lot of men who just want to be more direct, right? In the same way as I spoke to women, they just get pissed off, like, why are you wasting my time? Let's just get down to it, honey, you know. And if I tried to talk to women in the same way I talk to those men, they'd be really offended, like, oh my God, what are you saying to me? So I had to learn to be a really like adaptable communicator. And it definitely was not across the board. There's some women who are just straight down the line. There's some men who need the kid gloves. It's absolutely not something you can apply to everyone. That's why I think it's better to think of as masculine and feminine rather than male and female, because people have those qualities in whether they're a man or a woman in different sort of amounts.
Right. And those two like mindsets or ways of communicating have different, like they produce different results. So you can see how in the communicating in the fluffy kind of tap dancing around, that mode of communicating works really well with the woke movement, because that kind of communicating forces the individual to kind of, at least from my perspective, make themselves a bit smaller. You know, you almost sacrifice yourself in order to try and figure out how to please this person and make sure they're, you're
Yes, it's very much how your words are landing for someone else, like what is going to be their response to, rather than sort of letting them take like responsibility for their response. You take responsibility for their response. And I could see how that has sprung up amongst women in terms of like evolution, if women had to women were a lot more working as a team. It wasn't as competitive. And then your relationship to men, you were probably more dependent on men in many ways. So you had to think about what response your behavior would get, because you didn't have that full direct control just to go out and do what you want to do, right? So it's adaptively, I can understand it. I think it's got its strengths and its weaknesses, but like, how does that affect the modern workplace? I think it has had some good effects, but I think possibly we're in an overcorrection at the moment.
Too much, where the individual is actually destroyed. So the writing the articles briefly touched on collectivism, and I think that's really the issue here. Like, for example, wokeism breeds collectivism. It is a collectivist movement, where it destroys the individual, and so that kind of tap dance breeds. It's a collectivist kind of mindset, because it relies on the idea that the other person is not self-accountable, and that there isn't like a standard with which we're both operating from. The standard is destroyed, so truth or objectivity is destroyed. Therefore, it's this. Now there's no standard with which I can measure my own communication and behavior. I then can't trust that you're doing the same because there is no standard, or you don't like the standard, you don't want the standard. And now I have to sort of tap dance around you, and it's overall it's just a net negative. It's a net negative because I personally don't. I struggle when I'm communicating with someone who communicates in that fluffy way. It's a struggle for me. I have to actually center myself and really like it's a struggle. It's hard for me. It's
Yeah.
really hard. So whenever I do receive an email or a text or whatever it is from someone who communicates in that way, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
dang.
you know what? I think as I get older, I think maybe as women get older, they become a bit more like that as well. Just experience. I'm not sure. When you're young, I suppose you're more focused on your peer group,
Yeah,
and that would be other younger women, And
right.
so even though it looks like you're possibly not communicating much, you are communicating a lot through not communicating, like by saying all the stupid stuff like, oh, you look so good, look at your dress, all that stuff. It looks like it's just bullshit, but you're actually like communicating certain things about the social rank and like your homogeny as a group and where you are in that group. Like there's a whole lot of unspoken stuff that makes young women behave like that. As you get older, you don't give as much of a shit. So you don't give I think as you get older, you don't care about your peers as much. You're more centered in yourself. So you can get more. And as I get older, I definitely prefer more direct communication style. So yeah, I suppose a lot of it's cultural, a lot of it's within our biology. Yeah, I just think that in terms of Australian literature, we are there. We do have a feminine mode of communication that is dominant at the moment. One of the ways that has been ushered in is definitely through more like diversity, equity, and
Yes,
inclusion
yes,
measures, which we're really encouraged to get on board with.
right.
And yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily beyond the obvious, which I think most people, besides bigots, will agree with, that, everyone should get a fair go, whether you're a woman
Yes,
or a man, whether race,
right,
religion, or whatever you are.
right.
Beyond that, I don't know where the value is, because in terms of artistic work, I just think it can have
Yes,
a really negative effect on the whole ecosystem. Like in terms of like, if you've got women, or not even women, just if you've got a feminine mode of prioritizing people's feelings, not giving harm, a subjective truth over objective truth, and cancellation modes over directly expressing how you feel about something, sort of, if you've got all this happening in a scene like we do in Australian literature, and then you've got that kind of predominating over literary journals, most people in publishing, most people who are gatekeeping writers' festivals and all that sort of stuff, then that leads to a certain ethos which is really hard to break out of. Otherwise, you're considered a terrible, bigoted person if you dare to sort of
yeah.
go in a different way. And also, is it producing the best artwork? Is it producing the most interesting, exciting ideas? I feel like it's got a dampening down effect.
Well, it's not. I mean, how can it produce a good quality work? Because if before you even get to even writing anything, before you even
Mm,
get there, if you're thinking about how you can not offend, how you can make
mm,
sure everyone's going to be happy with your whatever it is that you're working on, how can you make sure that everyone knows that you're a good person and that you mean no harm? But by that point, you're done. You're you're done. How the hell can you even write after that? I would be just even saying that makes me exhausted.
lie down, Marshall. You need a Bexner lie down by then, Margaret. It's like
At that
done.
point, at that point, don't you need to sit down and relax because you've done a lot of what you've done a lot of
Yeah,
mental work and you're exhausted. So how can you write? How can you write? How can you produce anything when that's like the things you have to jump through, the hoops you have to
yeah,
jump through to even sit and get to the page is
yeah,
all of that insane,
yeah.
absolutely insane.
Yeah. Is that how you feel? Like specifically as a man, are you very conscious of yourself in those more feminine spaces, having to always kind of, worry about how you're gonna hit people in terms of your, or you just don't care anymore?
Yeah. Well, it's twofold. It's twofold. Because that's the reality of the literary scene. You automatically, it's just there. It's present. It's just, I mean, at this point, you have to be a psychopath to not feel it,
Mm,
right? You'd have to, because it's
yeah,
there, right?
yeah,
And then you're like, well, what do you do? Because in the industry, if you're a male, if you're white, if you're straight, you've got a target on your back.
yeah,
So the thing that stands out about you, for me, whenever I do maneuver, the thing that stands out about me is me being male. It's very clear. So what do you do with that? Well, I have learned to just dismiss that, but I see it for what it is, and yeah, I just see it for what it is, uh, and kind of move on. But I'm not gonna, yeah, it's very real. It's always very real, very present. You just see, these people just look at you based on your identity. That's all they see. Um,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
strange because me being black and gay kind of cancels out other elements, and it like kind of softens me being a man. It kind of softens in their head.
Like this depression Olympics, this intersectionality. It's not,
Yeah,
no one's seeing you and just listening to what you actually say, and
yeah,
they're like weighing up your in this weird moral Olympics of oppression and power.
right.
They're weighing up and how much do I have to listen to him? Not based on what
Exactly.
you say, whether you've got well thought out arguments or whatever, but just
Right.
based on these identity points. It's
Right.
just,
Right.
it's pathological.
It is, and based on your identity is, the assumption is you're going to have a particular kind of worldview. That's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
assumption, and
Yeah.
so they just go on assuming you're this kind of way because of your identity, and it's
Mm.
ridiculous, and it's ever present, and that this is the negative consequence of, you know the woke movement, and this,
Mm, mm.
you know
Yeah, I take your point as well. I think it's a great point about, I think that the collectivism that naturally arises more in the female psyche because of the way we've evolved to have to work more. Men have evolved to work in more opposition to each other. Is definitely,
mm,
more of that sort of hierarchical structure, and men seem to sort of just accept that and get on, and they compete, and then they realize, okay, that guy's better at that or whatever. It's more
right,
competitive structure. Women have evolved to sort of work in a more collective structure where to stick your head above the rest is not okay. So that's why we sort of take each other down and so forth.
right,
And I take your point that actually sort of dovetails in with the identity politics that the woke movement
yeah,
prioritizes, because rather than see us as individuals, the women's sort of, or the female way of looking, the collective way of looking at things kind of works in with that. And I think it's just kind of all slid together in a strange way. And yeah, I don't know.
yeah, and you just, I don't know about you, but whenever you go to a literary event, everyone looks stressed out. Everyone looks
They
stressed
do
out.
now. They didn't used to. They just look drunk and happy and like woohoo.
Now they're just stressed out about everything because they have to be perfect, and they have to say the right thing, and they have
Yeah,
to
there's
remember
this
what they said.
moral element. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and everything, like in any moment, like your character, could be obliterated because you've either said
Mm,
something slightly wrong, or you've,
mm,
not positioned yourself in the right way, and you haven't said the right thing, or you haven't said it in the right way, and everyone looks miserable, absolutely
yeah.
miserable. And
It's
like,
definitely an aspect of the feminist movement now. I mean, I look at feminists just eating each other alive now, and it's really a purity spiral where, like, it's like, oh God, like,
Yeah,
I'm more a fan of the second wave sort of feminists. I just think now it's just become this weird like policing of each other, which has become just so toxic. And
yeah,
but it's just mean girls. It's become mean girl stuff. And so I think this is what this article by Helen Andrews kind of was focusing on, which is the reality that feminism, a lot of the time, it now, rather than it being a supportive movement where women can kind of rally to support each other, it's about women taking each other down now, a third wave feminism. And I think that that's a lot of women, younger women's reality, unfortunately. And
right,
men, of course,
right,
I think men in a sense have just kind of, my feeling is that a lot of men have just clocked out. They're just like, there's nothing I can do. I'm the enemy. Okay, I'll duck my head. I'll take it. I'll just, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's really sad because, of course there are bad men and there are bad women, but like we can't just like throw each other under the bus like that. Like we share
no,
this planet and we have evolved masculine and feminine characteristics to come together as a species and thrive, and we need to continue doing that. If again, I noticed that when Helen Andrews did publish this article, there are a lot of like really more extreme right-wing men who are like obviously not very
right,
keen on women, who use this as a all over Twitter, for example, X,
right,
which is a bit more right-wing these days, use this as a excuse to throw women on the bus. Go, look, you see, women should never have been allowed out of the kitchen. And like that's bullshit. Okay.
right,
But then you've got women who just feel like now it's completely okay to talk down on men, and that's absolutely fine, right? So I just think both extremes are just really toxic. We're not doing ourselves any favors. I must say, when I read Helen Pluckrose's article, which she put up on her Substack, which I'll link to in our show notes,
yeah,
I felt a great sort of a solace in that, because she basically brought it back to like, no, it's not about feminizing or masculinizing workspaces. It's about like we need to bring liberal values back again. Liberal values where it's meritocratic, is that the word? It's about
yeah,
truth. Yes,
yeah,
truth. And all these sort of things. And like we hold both sexes to the same standards, and then we see
that's
where the
it.
chips fall, right? And I was like, yes, thank you, Helen. That's what we need to do.
That's right. And freedom of expression too. Freedom of
Yeah,
expression.
freedom of expression,
Yeah.
freedom of association, which is such a
Yeah.
big, because this is how cancellation culture works.
Right.
That
Right.
if you are, and I see that happening a lot in feminist spaces, that if you, if you're aligning yourself to her, then that's it. You're beyond the pale, and
Yeah.
it's just a really, it's just
Right. And it's also full of this whole woke movement, whether it's feminism or the post-colonial movement or what, but
mm,
all of it. It's full of individuals who claim to be enlightened and evolved, but who have not actually,
yeah,
who have not actually who've not had a who don't have a good relationship with themselves, with reality, and who they really are. Because quite often they're very different in their private life versus what they espouse online. More often than not, they are. They are.
yeah,
And I just think the principle. Anyone that tells you how good of a person they are, more often than not, they're not. They're more often than not, they're terrible. Because why are you telling the world how good of a person you are? Just be a good person.
mm, yeah. Just be a good person, or become obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, just be a good person. Just live these values if it's really truly your values. Why do you have to profess it to the world? Why? Why?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Another thing I was thinking about in Helen's article, Helen Andrews' article, was that I don't think specifically, I suppose, in terms of academia and publishing, in terms of those sort of workspaces, is that she didn't really bring in class and education
Mm,
into it. And I
yes.
think that's really important because, so I did a little Google, and in Australia, 85% of workers have degrees and over half have postgraduate qualifications. So we have within publishing, there is an upper middle class progressivism, basically, which
Yeah.
is the sort of overriding thing now, and that's across male and female. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm thinking there's a lot to do with the rise of wokeism has got to do with these kind of, you know, what they call the chattering classes, you know, the meaning making classes, which is, you know, journalism, academia, the arts and so forth, which have really become much more powerful. I mean, they've always been powerful, but in terms of now with the internet and social media and everyone being able to, you know, basically turn on their camera and have a say like we're doing, those people have become more powerful, right? And we see that in the rise of alternate media. You know, people listen to podcasts before they'll turn on the news to figure out things. So I think that that's a really big part of it that she didn't like factor in. And I think that sort of we know that in academia, that postmodern push, that way of looking at the world, and that way of looking at the world through the post-colonial lens of oppressed and oppressor, which is pretty much dominating Western politics and society at the moment, that's where it came from. And people were educated in that system, and then now they are in positions where they're publishing journals, or they're literary directors or festival directors or whatever, and this is the sort of water we've been swimming in. So I think she's missed that aspect of it, that it's not necessarily all about feminization. It's to do with this sort of upper middle class progressive way of looking at things.
Yes, no, that is very true. That is very true. And the upper middle class, they, you know, of this group we're talking about, they have their own. They have their, how to put it, their own fantasy of. That's how I view. That's how I view these elite upper middle class people who control, you know, the journalism, publishing, whatever, and who are on the left. They have their own fantasy of how, of themselves in relation to the other, whether it's the working class, whether it's racial minorities, etc., etc., etc. They have their own fantasy of their role in this conversation, and quite often it's just, to me it's pure, it's just pure racism. It's just pure racism. It's saviorism. It's, you know, it's all those things, and it's they provide conversations or solutions that aren't actually solutions.
Yeah.
Actually hinder those they're speaking to for whatever, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot of tokenization, and a lot of it feels a lot of as you say, ideas and conversations that feel really divorced from the real world and like from the actual problems that people are having. Like I saw something on the ABC the other day, and it was about Aboriginal people in like basically living, you know, pretty like living in deserts, living pretty far out in communities, right? And one of their biggest issues is, I didn't realize this, in terms of energy. So instead of having just normal sort of energy where you can switch on the power point and then you pay for it later, they have this, because they don't have that infrastructure, they have this system where they have to top up these energy cards, and then they have this energy box on the side of their house, and they pump in this code, and then they get $50 worth more of energy. Yeah. So you're thinking about it, these are people who are living out in like often 40-degree heat, like literally, you know, in the middle of very communities. If they want to go top up their energy card, they often have to walk like maybe an hour in this heat to go and top the energy card up. Do they have the money to top the energy card out? A lot of these people have health issues like diabetes and so forth, where they need to get their medications cool in fridges. These are all real world actual problems. You know, I'm thinking of all the money that goes into closing the gap in terms of issues with, you know, the living standards of Aboriginal Australians. This is something that could really be fixed if that money, all this talking and thinking, just went into giving these people energy so they could afford to have their aircon on, so they could afford to have their fridge on and keep their food and their medications cool. This is something that could really actually fundamentally help people on a real world level. And instead it seems like, especially in spaces like Australian literature, we talk all about this sort of stuff and nothing ever happens. People's lives don't actually necessarily get any better. And so, yeah, sometimes I think about that we're all just in this little echo chamber in Australian literature, and then we give a lot of, so for example, within Australian literature there's a lot of fellowships and awards for Indigenous Australians, and I in no way object to that. But do they go to the people who really need that leg up? I don't know. A lot of the time it doesn't. It seems like they go to eastern fringe, people living on the east of coast of Australia, who are already got PhDs and this and that and are living a city lifestyle. I don't know. To me, it just seems everything's come too theoretical, and I think that is to do with a class thing. I think that is an upper middle class way of looking at things. Yeah.
That's a brilliant point you made, Michelle, because it just made me think of I always wondered, why does a literary scene buy into, like, one person speaking for a whole group? Like, for example, if I was to just enter the literary scene right now and profess to speak for the Somali community, the literary scene would just eat that up. Eat that up without questioning who am I. How did I come to be the spokesperson for the Somali community? Is this even true? What's my relationship to the Somali community, etc., etc., etc.? And just like you've come up with a solution to the gas issue, my skin color does not determine whether I can provide a good solution or not. We're all thinking human beings. We can come up with a solution together. They've just created this system where they have this token person from the quote unquote community to speak for the community, who really tells them what they want to hear in exchange for opportunities, money, whatever.
Yeah, it's like an industry of an exchange of, I don't know, it's like an exchange. It's not even an exchange of information. It's like an exchange of freedom from culpability. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you pretend and you make all the right gestures and talk about this issue, then that's okay. You've done your work, right? But no one's life has actually changed. Like, actually, that person still needs to walk an hour in 40-degree heat to get their electricity card topped up. It's like, I don't know. It's like, it's chattering classes, which we have become. I'm definitely a working class girl. I was the first person in my family who went to uni, and maybe that's given me a slightly different perspective because I sort of have shifted from here to there just through education, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But I don't know. I just see this meaning-making system which we've become part of as writers, and as people who've gone to uni and so forth. It feels very divorced from reality.
Reality and truth, and just, I don't know, it all feels very, very fake to me. A lot of the conversations feel very, very fake to me. And speaking of politeness and all sorts of stuff, I was told not to say the word fake because it could insult people. And I was told I should probably say misguided, or and I'm like, but if I see something that's fake, it just is fake. Like, if you're talking about a particular issue for 20 years, one issue for 20 years, and you provided no result, no resolution over the 20 years, and you keep on talking about having the same conversation again and again and again and again with the same kind of mannerisms every single time, I'm sorry, it's fake, and you're being a caricature, you're being a cartoon.
And I think that we can see that in Australian literature in a sense that there are often, for different like, I hate this term, but anyway, I've got to put it in air quotes, for different marginalized groups, right? You can see that there have risen up certain people who become the representative for that group. And then editors and publishers and, festival directors go to those people every time. I'm like, there's got to be 100 people underneath that person who are just as good, have just as much to say, and who need their chance to speak as well, but it's like, oh, it's just easier just to go to that tokenistic person, and then of course that person's loving it because they're getting all the work and
Sure.
opportunities, and depending on their personality, they're probably kicking people down below them, where they
Absolutely.
could be bringing them up,
Absolutely.
it's just it's a system of convenience, and you scratch my back,
Huge.
I'll scratch yours, and
Of course.
yeah.
And that individual, that token individual, has convinced the industry that if
Mm,
you give me up with all the opportunity, that
mm,
somehow it's going to manifest into giving everyone else the opportunity. So the more awards you give me, somehow, some
mm,
way, I don't know how, but somehow, some way, it's going to somehow other people from my community would also be rewarded.
yeah.
Don't ask me how, but they just will.
How,
You just
yeah,
gotta,
how does it transfer?
you just got to believe. You've just got to believe. And I was just, because we've been here for almost an hour, but before I want to say that I think the other issue is altruism. I really do
Mm,
think, I really do think, um, you know, we do live in a world that's very altruistic, not in a good way, but in a way that demands that everyone else is self-sacrifice.
mhm.
Everyone needs to become a martyr. I think the woke movement really relies on that idea of,
Yeah,
you sacrifice yourself for
yeah.
the
It's a
greater good.
transfer of wealth and power from the privileged to the oppressed.
Yes, you may have been a working class individual, right? You may have been poor, right? You may have worked hard and figured things out for yourself, and now you're doing well. But guess what? You have to give all that back
Mm.
to you have to do that, and it's just yeah,
And this
it's
kind of sense of like fair, like that sort of ethos, pulls upon, which is this idea of like fairness and all that. That is a very feminine. I think that's why women and or just
yeah,
as sort of people who have got more feminine bent to their thinking. That's why, and they do feel they're doing the right thing because it feels like, oh well, it's not fair, And women are all about that, like what the harmony thing and it under the guise of compassion. There's a lot of like dodgy stuff that gets ushered in the
right,
door.
right,
Yeah, and that's
right.
where I feel like I don't feel like I don't agree with Helen Andrews that women are the sort of the originators of the woke movement, and wherever women are, they'll be woke. I don't agree with that at all, but I
No,
do think that they have lately been handmaidens, either consciously or unconsciously, for that. And I see that, for example, in things like the sort of ways people in Australia that should respond to issues like the war, with between Israel and Hamas. And I see people, you know, making excuses for terrorism and all that, but it's because it's
yeah,
like they put everything through a lens of oppressed and oppressor,
um,
and then it's like, okay, well, no, Hamas can't be the bad guys; they're resisting, and it's like we're not living in a fairy tale. Like it's not
no,
about everything being goodies and baddies. We need to have more of a nuanced view of things, and I think sometimes I love many things about women and men, but I think sometimes that women do fall prey to um, ushering that in, um, and it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, really. But they don't
yeah,
see it hidden underneath there. Do you know what I mean? They just want to see the good in everybody. Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's the kind of woman in this in this sphere who is
mm.
misled. But there are women who know exactly what they're doing, and
Oh,
they're not
absolutely. Oh,
misled.
absolutely.
The leaders of this movement. So again, it
Yeah,
comes back to, we're all individuals. Yes, we have a biological reality,
yeah.
but we're all individuals, and we you know I guess it's, again, another way to another I guess the combination is effectively, nature versus nurture.
Mm,
And
mm.
we can overcome parts of our nature that isn't good, and we've been able to
Yeah,
do
of course we can. We know that ourselves. For example, I don't think the feminization of some workspaces has been a bad thing. Like, obviously, when women came into the workforce sort of in the 1940s and 50s in a bigger way into male workforces, there would have been a lot of pushback. And I'm sure in lots of male dominated like workforces, there would have been a lot of dodgy comments and sexism and nudie pictures on the wall. Just like,
well.
so there's always this balance, but I just think that we don't want to make things like, we don't need to re-masculinize the workforce. We don't need to
No,
feminize the workforce. We just need to have some standard rules,
exactly,
that this is how we conduct ourselves in the workplace, and
exactly,
everyone across the board plays by the same rules, and that will sort things out, I think.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think I can't think of a better solution to that. I really can't. I really
No, I
cannot.
can't either.
And
No.
if you don't like that solution, I don't like you. To me, you either don't like things being fair.
Yeah. And in
I
terms of Australian literature in particularly, I think that what that looks like going forward is having a little bit of a course correction from the last few years where things tipped over too far. And,
yeah,
to disagree was to be completely, beyond the pale, and to be cancelled and to lose work. And if you say something that offends somebody, suddenly they're clutching their pearls and they need a safe space, and everyone's like, oh, you poor thing, and demonizing the other person. We need to really go beyond that. And I can say there is a bit of a course correction. Like, I saw an article this morning about a woman called Kate Clancy, who's a English author, and I remember her cancellation very clearly because it was about a year after mine, and
oh,
so
okay,
it was on my radar. And so she was a woman who'd worked a lot with she spent 20 years of her life as a teacher. She was a poet, and she'd written
yes,
a memoir about her work with she spent a lot of her life working with children, like refugee kids and stuff like that, helping
yes,
teach
yes,
English and so forth. And she wrote a memoir about that, and because some of the terms she used in her book, people said, oh, it's racist and that. She would talk about their almond eyes or their coffee colored skin or whatever, right? And it was like she was Hitler. Like, okay, you might think, well, that's not the most politically correct way of describing someone, or it's not the most original way of describing someone, but whatever. This is a woman who's pretty much devoted her life to helping these young
yeah,
people. The students that were part of the book had given their permission to be talked about and mentioned, and there were actually 20 of them who signed and wrote a letter in her defense and said, no, she's been
oh,
incredible to us, she's been such a wonderful teacher, blah blah blah.
awesome.
It didn't matter. Suddenly someone decided that she was on the nose, and then everyone, her own publisher Pan Macmillan, wouldn't help her. She was terribly cancelled. Anyway, now her publisher has just come out with they've got a new CEO there, but has just come out and apologised in the Times in an article that came out yesterday, I think, for the way she was treated. And now other people are crawling out the woodwork saying, oh, just remember we did go a little bit over the top. And she's saying, finally I'm being asked to dinner parties again, because she was basically sort of excommunicated from literary society for like 3 or 4 years. For what? For saying almond-shaped eyes and coffee-colored
Yeah,
skin. It's like, come on.
it's
Like, yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
It's a joke. It's so ridiculous that you just think, how is this real? But it's real. It's
It
real.
is real. It was real, and there was real life consequences
Yeah,
for her and for many other people. So we definitely need a course correction. I'm hoping. I don't
yeah,
know. In Australian literature, I don't think we got to quite those peaks as they did in the US and the
right,
UK.
right,
But we did hit a few high notes, and Verity La was amongst them.
right.
Um, and so I think we really need to be honest about that, and to take an article like this seriously, rather than just think, oh well, this woman Helen Andrews is just bringing, she's just being anti-feminist. It's good to, I think, I don't know,
Engage.
explore these ideas.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. All right, Michelle, I think we've gone over the hour. Before we finish up, is there anything else you want to say? Any other points before we finish up?
No, no. I've made myself unpopular enough for one hour.
All good, all good, all good. All right, guys.
Yeah. Anything you want to bring up as a man?
As a man, I just want to say I'm guilty as charged. I'm a terrible person.
Horrible, isn't it? But I do think that men in Australian literature do, like so many men I speak to, just men. It doesn't matter if they're black, white, whatever,
Yeah,
different religions, different backgrounds, upper class, working class, whatever. Men are generally like, they just kind of accepted that it's just not their moment. And they're just like, that's the feeling I get.
yeah. And isn't that counter what the woke movement would want you to believe, that men are just obsessed with being the center and obsessed with
Mm,
being, isn't that just the irony? But I think it's sad. I think it's sad. I think you know,
mm,
yeah, I think it's sad. I think men need to grow some balls a little bit, grow a little bit of backbone and just kind of say no.
mm,
Say, look, I'm not bad because I'm not an evil person because I'm mad. I'm like, just
mm.
what the hell, and just write what you have to write, and you know, and yeah, because even in the industry, a lot of men are writing feminist literature, and I just think, oh God, like
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think,
let's keep what men offer and let's add on to that. Let's open the door to other stuff, to what,
yeah,
women, their different voice and, all different sorts of whatever, people from all different sorts of walks of life. Let's add on. Let's not shut down
right.
men. Um, I don't think that we're richer for that.
No, definitely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Mm. All right,
All
Morgan. Thank
all
you.
right. Thank you, and thanks everyone for watching. Those of you who have been watching, because there have
Yeah,
been
we'd
some
love
views.
to hear what people have to say. Like, it'd be great to
Yes,
get
please,
some comments and feedback, get the
please.
conversation going. Yeah.
Yes. And we should probably start encouraging the viewers to like, subscribe, and share. Actually,
That would
so,
probably be a good idea.
yeah. So guys, like, subscribe, and share, please. We'd
Yeah.
appreciate that. All
Yeah.
right. See you.
See ya.